not negotiate.
Yeah.
In other words, those guys identified what their interest as a nation was. Kenya, our interest keeps oscillating. That's why when you're talking about how, we find ourselves with a CBC, go back to how we found ourselves with an 844. Moi gets mesmerized by what you see. People, the machinery and equipment is taken through some of those workshops, and he says, I want this in Kenya. But it doesn't take time to digest and even allow the country to digest on how they'll deliver it. They bring the art and craft, music, home science, all those very practical-oriented subjects. And for them, they're thinking of, art and craft, metalwork, welders, welders and carpenters.
Welcome to our listeners and viewers. My name is Mamka Anyona. I am the host of A Certain Amount of Madness podcast. Now, Kenya has been facing a crisis in education. Education was long considered the great equalizer in the Kenyan context. But in recent years, from the challenges of the curriculum change from 844 to CBC, to the challenges the universities are facing with the new education funding model, to most recently in May, where the country was very sad to learn of 16 girls passing away in a dormitory fire in Tumishi Academy in Nakuru, which was followed quite swiftly by a number of fires and school closures across the country, rocking the nation to its core, because this featured some of the most prominent schools in the country. At the moment, we have about 50 schools that are already closed. The government is saying this is just 1% of schools, so the school calendar should go on as it does. But I am joined today by Boaz Waruku, who is an educationist, a food scientist, a lawyer, the policy and strategy advisor at Elimu Bora Working Group, Kenya's foremost civil society coalition on education rights. He's a director at the Civil Society Education Fund. He is the former chairman of the Constitution and Reform Education Consortium, a founding trustee of Uraiya, and former program coordinator at Citizens Coalition for Constitutional Change. That's a hell of a mouthful, but I will allow Boaz to introduce himself to you. And he joins us today to talk about this crisis. Boaz, let me come to you and first ask you to top up where I may have left out some of your credentials, and introduce yourself to our audience.
Thank you, Mamka, and thanks for welcoming me to this conversation. Indeed, as you were reading that, I would defer to my senior good brother and friend, Professor Dr. Muni Wekesa, who would always insist, please don't leave any of those. And I always retort that for me, call me Boaz, the active citizen, sovereign citizen of this great republic, because that sums it up all. And because, Mamka, I'll tell you, just from the age of 18, it became apparent to me that something was not normal, particularly the kind of education system we're going through. I joined university at a time when pay as you eat had just been introduced. I joined university at a time when you're being told if you do not have money to pay, you'll not get books, you'll not get academic material to enable you go through. And shortly thereafter, I joined the university when some lists were being put on the notice board that the following erstwhile students are now no longer required to be here, pack and leave. Why? That they had not paid the 6,000 that was required. That is why I am Boaz, because I say this one is not normal. It cannot work like that. And since that day, I think I've been an active citizen.
It's interesting you speak of 6,000. It sounds almost like a fantasy to those of us. I went to university at a time when my school fees as a regular student was 16,000, and I was in medical school.
Yes.
I don't even know how much they pay today, but I know it is nothing like 16,000.
No, they pay on, right now actually, different universities charge different amounts. And the total sum for medical students, it's between 620,000 to 720,000 depending on which university. And then you see what the president did was to say that in Kenya here, you must look at the young ones and bracket them according to the income of their parents. Which, of course, you know that when you start doing so, discrimination and such things. So the details, so the summary of it all is that as Mubara, we challenged that in court and said you can't discriminate all these children. Wherever they come from, they deserve a chance. In fact, we were convinced and we had statistics to prove that those who are able rarely have their children in those public universities. So we said these ones who are here deserve to be supported. So that amount of madness from the government required some serious pushback. And the pushback we mounted was through the courts, organizing also the young people to just to resist. And indeed, Ali Mubora has got one of the members is the conglomeration of students. We call it the student caucus. So many of them come in to give inputs or ideas on how those should be addressed. We also have WASU. And WASU, because part of the research that we do, we try to relate to the practical conditions on campus. And then we realized that what they were selling was just hot air, was not going to fix anything. And Mamka, as we speak, if they were fixing something, how come the universities are almost closing? How come redundancies are being declared at Moi University and Egerton University? How come the universities owe, they have pending bills in excess of 100 billion? How come the young ones, the learners there are still getting to those laboratories and the practical-oriented facilities with equipment that is 50 years old, more than 20 years behind? How come? It is not normal.
Well, I can testify to that. When I went to medical school, a lot of our equipment was ridiculously old.
Yes.
But let's go to the foundation of this issue. Let's talk about how education, because I feel like there's a way in which education is discussed that abstracts away from its origins. I think education is truly the core of how a society will understand itself, will understand the world in which it exists and its place in it, understands the limits of what is possible. Education is so fundamental that literally every prosperous nation in the world are sure to design an education system that creates the kind of citizens that they wish, to occupy that country, and sort of it's the education system that shapes the country, not the other way around.
True.
Yet we discuss CBC, we discuss the new funding model, we discuss 844, we discuss school fires, as though these things are all sort of like disparate pieces. But let's go back to its very origins and maybe tell our viewers who may not have had some time to think about this, how Kenya's education system came to be and how it has evolved over time.
Thank you, Mamka. First things first, you should understand that the colonizers came in search of their own interests for prosperity. But as they came, then they realized that they couldn't exploit us more without some modicum of education. And so that stratification where they came, and then they established superior schools for the Europeans, and then the moderate, the medium one for the Asians, and then what they are calling natives. These are nationalities they are calling natives. They established something that would just allow them to have sufficient knowledge to be able to read and take records for their own benefits, And then when they realize that, you are getting to know a little bit more, then you'll be taken somewhere else. So that the education they were giving was just to service the colonial hegemony. And indeed, you see, when we gained the flag independence, and with the Ominde having attended that the Addis Ababa, the first conference that was discussing education for Africa and for Africans. And when he came back, of course, he had gone with the first also minister, J. Otiende, the one who came back and Kenyatta appointed as the Minister for Education. When they came back and they wanted to see how could it be organized in a way that the education we want is education that is sufficient or adequate in terms of enabling the citizens of this country to enjoy the benefits of freedom, to enjoy intellectual development, and to help them realize how do you exploit the resources that you have. You know, we were lucky because we had at least some people who had gone through some education, and they had known that that is the only vehicle through which you'd be able to provide essentials for humanity in our country here. And fortunately, when that happened, of course, I know you've gone through the Ominda report, lots of good suggestions made, but the only things that were done is at least they opened up the way so that every community and all the... Now, when I'm referring to community, I'm talking about those they call the natives.
Yes.
We call them nationalities. So each of those were now being allowed, if you want school, you can donate land. You can put certain resources together and put some classrooms. Mud wall things came up. In other words, there was a modicum of freedom to establish the schools, the churches, or religious institutions, so to say. But with time, then you realize that the government was clawing back on a responsibility to support this kind of initiatives. Because indeed, with a newly independent nation, you'd require and expect the government to invest a little bit more on setting the foundation right, because you want to develop and build the human capacity so that they can now move forward in a trajectory that they understand. That is clear, that is well grounded on knowledge, on science, you know. But then the government realized, okay, don't give them that kind of education, they'll be troublesome. And indeed, you realize that much later on, they started even cracking down on the lecturers and the students. They were targeting universities and also higher levels of education in whichever area so that they would keep them just down there so that they do not rise to ask certain questions. So this kind of education progression, the system that they were establishing, was cloned in the cloth of the colonizer.
Okay.
And that education just simply enabled us to learn more of what the colonizer wanted us to know and less of what we ourselves wanted to know. For instance, the history of Kenya, I know this would be controversial to many people, but I'll tell you the history of Kenya is not yet been written in a correct manner. Indeed, Mamka, let me just own up. I went to Mboga Primary School, and the history
that's
books...
near my village.
Wow, it's interesting. That's for another conversation.
Yeah.
And I, from class 5, standard 5 to standard 8, I would be scoring like 100% in history. And recently, because my dad was also a teacher, he kept those things in what we are calling safe. Now, nowadays, we know how they are locked.
Yeah.
I went through those, you know. I am among those who would write, who was the first person to see Mount Kenya? And I wrote David Ludwig, you know. Nikapewa, I was given a tick.
Point, exactly.
Do you know how mad I have been when I realized that I was topping that class with fake material, fake history, until I started interacting with Kenyans who had become conscious. Thank God I got to interact with some of people who were involved in the liberation movement at that time. Before Kagia died, I had occasion to have that interaction organized by the Released Political Prisoners Pressure Group. So just a round table like this, and you'll discuss the way we are discussing, get to understand. That is the time I realized that, okay, these colonialists were smarter than what we thought, you know, because you could see how they were trying to organize and ensure that the leadership here is clothed in their own garment. So that every time you try to rise and try to change things, then you'll not be able to, because the thinking around it is really the thinking that they wanted to inculcate here. Let me tell you that there are certain schools in this country I may not mention by the because I know many of the alumni there are also my friends. We may have to face off. But there are some schools that once you landed there, they will even protect you and prevent you from going back to your village. Why? Because you were supposed to be an elite that now starts thinking, you are smarter, you are better off, you are, those ones are
Keep you divided.
backward, And indeed, that happened. So that socialization is what informed what we call the philosophy of education in this country.
Yes.
Not that education that would help you to understand in its wholesomeness, understand the humanity and where you come from, and see what can be done to bring also those guys to a consciousness so that they come up. That was not being tolerated. So the philosophical foundation was faulty. And now when you see periodically, each time that the government realized that the kind of education they were dispensing to the citizens was still, in as much as you try to suppress them, the citizens would realize there's something you're not telling them, which they want. And some innovative and creative individuals. And this is what was happening at the universities and even within the senior common rooms and the students themselves. When they become inquisitive and then they start questioning, they crack down on them. And we lost many young people. Some were killed, others incarcerated, and we have that. So the history does not allow for an education system, a liberative kind of philosophy, one that would equip this learner. You require the deep knowledge. By the way, if you don't know your history and yourself, you're not knowledgeable. So that was denied. They were denied that. So if you also do not get the space to interact and think collectively and decide on what kind of solutions are possible, those coming from around the lake, you've been seeing the fishermen going there. If the education does not help you realize how you can capitalize on that and ensure that that resource you are holding can sustain your life and for posterity, so that then it's managed better. You know that you require science. Technology would help you do that. But rarely do you find that our education goes to that direction. That's why those who are ahead of us, I keep on wondering why they were learning about, the geography of the European.
Yes.
And even the literature. Okay, literature is good because literature has no borders. But, the geography there, some have retired without even crossing the border. So which geography, what was of use to that? So essentially, our government has never sat down to think through and understand what kind of education do we need? Why that kind of education? What we called in Kiswahili, elimu tuitakayo, the education that we want, the education that we deserve, and the education that we must inculcate among the generation of Kenyans, because we must look ahead.
So now explain this to me, because a few months ago, I was at an event where I happened to sit opposite the Minister of Health of Mauritius. And he was explaining with the greatest pride the way in which when Mauritius was able to gain its independence, they had this very deliberate approach towards prioritizing education, but also, for lack of a better word, nativizing education, making sure their education was actually benefiting Mauritians. And they have 99% literacy rate. They have education free from birth to university as a constitutional provision, that regardless, and Mauritius, like every other African country, has gone through its debt crisis, its fiscal crisis. But these constitutional rights, including health, but today we're talking about education, are never clawed back, regardless of the IMF's austerity measures and so on and so forth, because for them it is philosophically foundational to the country's existence, to Mauritians and how they understand themselves, that education is supposed to be free of charge and is supposed to impart upon the learner certain types of skills and certain types of knowledge about themselves. Kenya has this colonial history for sure.
Yes.
But the colonizers are not here anymore.
They're
So
here.
we have had an opportunity. Maybe you
The
tell me
spirit,
otherwise.
they're here in spirit. Go ahead.
Because we have had an opportunity. For example, our constitutional moment.
Yes.
We did revise the constitution, and in Article 53, we did guarantee education to every child in this country.
Free and compulsory.
Free and compulsory.
Yes.
But we know that today we are paying school fees.
Yes.
But before we even get into the question of the financing of education, which we should, let's talk about the fact that we've now had a curriculum review, and that curriculum review seems to have taken us steps backwards philosophically. What was the thinking behind this idea? Because the colonialists clearly thought Kenyans should be workers and not thinkers.
They are workers, not workers for ourselves. Also.
Exactly.
There's nothing wrong in working for me.
Yes.
Yeah, for myself, that is.
Precisely.
Yes.
But then this idea of a competency-based curriculum, as I understand it, entrenches that thought even further, and it even subdivides people at a very young age that you seem to be a bit smarter, so we'll allow you to think about more complex issues. You seem to be less smart, and we're not going to consider whether the expression of intelligence we are seeing when you're 6 years old is because maybe in your home you did not have this. In your home you did not have access to that. We're just going to assume that there's such a thing as innate intelligence. You're displaying lack of innate intelligence, so you're going to be a plumber. And we have decided as Kenyans that we are going to subject entire generations to plumbing and masonry and never allowing them a modicum. And I'm not saying there's anything wrong with those professions, but what is wrong with a plumber who has a PhD in philosophy? Why do we not aspire to that? How did CBC happen in the 21st century is what I'm trying to ask.
Thank you. And you started from the Mauritian history. Very nice history. Why? Because in Mauritius, the two critical, important rights that they entrenched within their constitution, and that is what is guaranteeing everyone. You know, many Kenyans are going there to study. Is that healthcare? Non-negotiable. Education, non-negotiable. Whatever you say, you, World Bank, IMF, or whoever, ADBs and such, these ones will not negotiate.
Yeah.
In other words, those guys identified what their interest as a nation was. Kenya, our interest keeps oscillating. That's why when you're talking about how, we find ourselves with a CBC, go back to how we found ourselves with an 844. Moi gets mesmerized by what you're seeing. People, the machinery and equipment is taken through some of those workshops, and he says, I want this in Kenya. But it doesn't take time to digest and even allow the country to digest on how they'll deliver it. They bring the art and craft, music, home science, all those very practical oriented subjects. And for them, they're thinking of, art and craft, metalwork, welders, welders and carpenters. They ran through that, and then they realized they did not prepare, plan for it. The philosophical foundation was not well thought out. It was, according to him, people who would just be busy workers, like in the Juakali, like he was creating the Juakali sheds, and not people who will be thinking to disturb him, because for him it is his regime protection must be safeguarded one. So with time, all those subjects were completely washed off. Then we come and the same system start complaining now. We are having an 844 which has a lot of theory, a lot of exams, and a lot of torture on our children because of many books, that you have to refer to once and for. Then they start now thinking, okay, we've gotten the medicine, CBC. But you start looking at how they introduce this. When you were talking about plumber, I was listening to Professor Magoa's voice when he was justifying CBC. He said he went to game and he was looking everywhere. From Kisumu, he couldn't get a plumber. So you see the thinking of somebody who was now the driver trying to drive this. His thinking was, let me look for other people's children to make them
members.
workers to, I don't want to use the term, to come and help you in your house.
No,
You
but
know?
I think it's a legitimate argument. I was
Yeah.
in university with his son, who is now a neurosurgeon. So clearly it was
Yes.
not his children he intended
No,
to
no,
be
no, no,
plumbers.
not his children.
Yeah,
That's
not
why
his
I'm saying.
children.
So it was others'
Yeah.
children. Why couldn't he go with his son to go and help him? Plumbing, I can even do in my house. But I require a plumber who also understands things. Many of those people, by the way, I know you've also engaged some of these, our Juakali people. You'll find how intelligent some of them are.
Yeah.
You just realize, oh, they didn't get the opportunity to go up and up in knowledge. And when I'm talking of up, I'm not saying being withdrawn for community. No. But being allowed to imbibe knowledge and skills more and more, so that one thing which they can do in 3 hours, they find themselves doing in 30 minutes, for instance. That is the kind of advancement that anybody would have wished for. But back to where you're saying now, this Magoa, and it started with Matiang'i. I always say Magoa is innocent, because when you are called and told where he implement, you go the way he was doing it. Because I am in the team of 4 who went to his office and demanded to know whether the ministry knew what they were implementing. And to him, he said, Boaz, your team and these guys, no. I've not been brought here to think. That's a professor telling us that I've been brought here to implement. And the following week, he was there at KICC launch. The president had launched that conference, education conference, and he was feeling, bellicose in a way of pronouncing that the train has left the station. The teachers are crying here. Children are crying here. Parents are crying. They don't know how this thing is. But it's because they could not reverse it. They didn't understand it. They did not prepare for it. They were forced just to start it. They were forced by forces beyond our borders. IMF, World Bank played a role. And through, I'll have to mention, I've interacted with Global Partnership for Education. They were among the pushers of this so-called education reform. And because there was lethargy on implementing that project they called education reform, the 3-year window that was given for that grant to be utilized was coming to an end, and they had not actually utilized a lot of it. It was in excess of 12 billion Kenya shillings. What did they do? They called the book publishers and said, wow, Eureka, we can actually sign this money to the book publishers to publish books for a curriculum that has not been designed. That is the mess that we found ourselves. For a system change that nobody has actually ascertained in terms of assessment to know what ails the 844 which you want to fix. And you want to fix it by an overhaul and not just rectifying a few areas. That became really puzzling. And indeed, because, when you sign contract and send money to the book publishers, of course, in Kenya here, what was also become important is those tenders and such, they are kickbacks. So I wouldn't be surprised that a lot of kickbacks went through. Because it is madness that would tell you to give money for books to be published before you're even clear on what the curriculum framework is.
So where did the curriculum come from?
It came much later. And indeed, I think I'm bringing this point that when the books were published and sent, because they wanted to show videos and pictures to the donors, that you see, indeed, we have done that. Those books had plenty of mistakes. It is on record. I think one can check where even the teachers first. The schools were not allowed to procure directly, so it was centrally procured, and the minister Matiang'i at the time flagged off, those books. I mean, the lorries that were taking books to the schools. Some schools did not even have staff room, so you wonder where the books were. When the teachers received them and they were seeing even the markings on the books, wrong labeling, such things, I know our comedians made a kill out of them, because when there's somebody pointing at the ear and telling you that is a nose, So you're saying, what the hell is not happening? But we pumped in money there and got another grant. And there's a loan supporting it. So other interests by people whose children were not in those CBC schools and classrooms. That is what drove us. The motivation was not from us. If, for instance, you were to go by what our Constitution 2010 had provided, would have gone slowly, the way the first things first, establish the Professor Douglas Odhiambo Committee, that task force. Professor Douglas Odhiambo, very sober man, with a team given. He was doing his work methodically. He laid the foundation. I'm privileged to say that part of the consultation he was having, I interacted with him and many of us in the Limubora. And you could see that he wanted to align the new education to deliver what the Constitution had promised. That is how he started even with the basic education, what we are calling the Basic Education Act. Some of us actually insisted, let it be the Right to Education Act. And because of the moderates from the government side, we said, okay, let's have it as a Basic Education Act. But it had the rights language. It had a strong pillar in there that whatever it takes, thou shalt not charge a penny when admitting a child. Thou shalt not ask for fee at the basic education level. Thou shalt provide infrastructure of quality to allow our children to go to school and learn. And thou shalt provide support system even to the parents. That's why the National Parents Association was integrated in the Act, so that those parents would also engage, and they have the safeguards for a free and compulsory basic education. Everything done, written, dusted very well. Implementation completely at variance. Now, that is when the problems began. Why? Because as we were seeing this, there are people who had other interests and not to fix education. And that is where we found it all wrong. If we had gone on the trajectory of Professor Douglas Odhiambo, if we had gone and faithfully implemented the Basic Education Act, more than 60% of our problems would be solved. But we are implementing less than 20% of what that act provides. Two, when it comes to appointing leadership within the ministry, everything else we look at except competency and capacity to drive or lead that sector. Why? Because the Basic Education Act gives the cabinet secretary, the CS, the cabinet secretary, the sole responsibility to ensure that the vision that is articulated in Article 43 and 53 of the Constitution, the Children's Act, the Basic Education Act, that all that is realized for every child in this country. The primary responsibility under Section 28, that the cabinet secretary shall ensure that all children are in school within defined timelines, with the terms, sessions, and such, with good break. Two, that when they are in school, whether it is day school or boarding, they are safe. And subsequently, the safety standards and parameters established. And three, that as they are safe, they are in school, there's quality. When you deal with quality, then you must look at the quality parameters, that they are teachers in there, teaching them. Two, that they have infrastructure. If it is the classrooms that are not congested, there must be libraries. Not like what you're hearing, there are some schools. You said Homa Bay. Homa Bay High School has no library. It's a national school with no library. So how are they even studying? That as you're having all those equipment being made, the governance and participation within that school is also made conducive. The voice of the learner. That the learner is respected. This is not just a recipient of knowledge. You know, the learning takes place through many ways. They just observe. Say, oh, you are teaching us democracy, but you don't allow democracy to thrive. They learn that, oh, this one is just theoretical things. So you must imbibe and exhibit that which you're teaching. So all these conditions must be in that school. And this is what the cabinet secretary is supposed to deliver, the infrastructure. You don't wait for presidents to go to the alliance and then realize, oh, there are many big boys here. Let me please them by telling them I'll give them 500 million for other things. You're doing so when there are some certain schools that do not even have classrooms that are adequate, that do not have the laboratories, and you're saying competency is to be built without those learning equipment and the tools that are required. At that time, you require only 4.82 billion to ensure that whatever was in the budget, you multiply by 2, then all our intern teachers would be permanent and pensionable. And so the headache that they have, because when you are underpaying these professionals, do you expect them to give their best? No, they can't. Because if I see a teacher running in the rain, they don't have transport to go back, that they are there and they cannot have lunch, decent lunch, you are actually lumpenizing these teachers. And that is very unacceptable. So in terms of wrong prioritization, I'm saying, you look at the figures I'm mentioning, there are adequate resources that can be allocated there. But you'll find that is, let me be point blank, the NIS vote that has been given now is in excess of 58 billion.
That is how many times? More than 10 times what is needed.
That is more than 10 times what you'll require to get additional 100,000 teachers and bridge that gap. I'm not saying that NIS we don't need, because intelligence we have. Unfortunately, the only intelligence we've seen are those intelligence that are smoking out government critics and abducting people. So essentially, we must be very clear. Where do we want to put our resources? Kenyans have to make that determination and say, if you're not thinking like us, if the philosophy of education that we have of ensuring that every child, every learner gets a right for quality education that makes them productive, that makes them really worthy of engaging in any sphere. If you are a Makanga person, you're a Makanga person who is intelligent, who has the knowledge, who has the skills, who has the attitude to relate with others. That is the education that we want. Not that now you're being downscaled. Because, for as long as you can write some receipts or you can punch in and get the digital communication, that is adequate. It is not that. So where we are, we would actually require to have a reprioritization of things in the country, starting with education. And I would tell you that if Kenyans wished, why would we say that we keep on having conflicts when education can help us sort out all that? Why don't we prioritize education for the next 10 years and 20 years and give it adequate attention and put in resources that would bring on board the teachers first? Investment in hiring qualified and trained teachers is not a waste, because you will see the outcome later. I was in Malawi when the period of Mbingu Mutharika, and they said, invest in them now and see the change that comes. I believe in that dictum, because when you put in the teachers that can train these young ones, that would coach them, that would inspire them, then you are awakening those sleeping giants. The sleeping giants need not be very big in body. They are the little ones that just require to be inspired to go to school. And one after the other, then they realize that knowledge is useful. And then they start getting how solutions are gotten. They get into the research, the technological innovation. And boom, we'll be having a country that we are not just looking at who has work elsewhere and your president has gone to negotiate to take you people there. No, we can create it right
our
here
country.
with the right thinking, the right framing of our education, and incubation of those ideas. Mamka, I don't know, when you were going to school, there must have been the Science Congress and such.
Yeah, there was, yeah.
Later on, there's a teacher who came to us. I think I'm a very happy person for having carried some first position in maths talk. I was a mathematician for long. Why? Professor Eshiwani was handing over that trophy at KICC, and that certificate said we should ensure that these people get scholarship to go and pursue the training that they deserve. You can imagine if that was taking place, that they tap the talents at that age and take those, because that is what China does. They see talent, they tap it, train, those people come back, they become so much passionate about developing the country.
Let's talk a little bit about that talent question, because that seems to be the argument made about CBC streaming students into various, into the, I don't know what they're calling them. I went to school in 844.
They talk of pathways.
These various pathways. That is fundamental.
Learning areas instead of subjects.
It reflects, to my mind, a recreation of what we had under the colonialists. That this is education for this kind of people. And I can bet you there is nobody who was part of the instrumentalization of or operationalization of CBC who wishes their child to go into the plumber pathway, if we call it that. That is, it's not going to happen. They're going to buy their way into, So I went through 844, and at the time it was considered the great equalizer for all its challenges. However, even in the 844 system, we still had, because there are two questions I'm trying to ask here. One is, how did CBC, in fact, undo even the equality gains that we had made with 844, and entrench an even more unequal sort of like streaming system that will literally doom millions to a life of poverty? But the second is, I want to go back to that question we started with of school fires. These school fires are happening exclusively in boarding schools. There isn't a developed country in this world whose majority go to boarding schools. Of course, people always point to Britain, but Eton is not a lion's. Whatever we may say. I went to Kenya High School, and at the time that I went to Kenya High School, it was an elite school. We had our own, I had my own cubicle in Form 4. That was this room by my own, But
there are
even
8 people
then,
in that room now.
That is my understanding. And that is exactly.
I have a child there.
And that is the point I want to make, that one of the things that caught my eye, when they finally showed us the CCTV footage of Utumishi girls boarding, the boarding facility, everyone was focused on the girls. But for me, what I noticed was that the corridors had beds. The positioning of those beds meant that these people were living, it looked like warehousing animals. So Kenyan parents are selling pieces of land, selling their livestock, taking on loans, their education loans up and down this country, to get their children into facilities that basically warehouse them like animals and treat them like animals. They lock them into these rooms. They have the most stringent, and actually very much against, child development. Like in that age that children go to high school, that's the time they need sleep the most. Most countries in the world are actually, increasing sleeping hours. You don't have people being woken up at 4 a.m. to shower with cold water and eat really terrible food. But we seem to have it so entrenched in our psyche that the only way that our children can learn is by being outright abused and warehoused in these prisons, basically, that people will sell their property to take the children there. In the rethinking of CBC, in the rethinking that happened during the CBC, how is it that we ended up maintaining that system and now it looks even worse than it did during my time? And how did we end up rolling back even the gains that we had made with 844 in terms of equality in education? So those are two different questions.
Yes, first, very unfortunate. We lost 16 girls to Mishi. Very close to June 16th, the Day of the African Child. Very close to a period just when we are trying to promote girls' education, girls who have gone to that level and maintained and are going to school and are brilliant and really are there. And then conditions become suffocative. One, congested in those small dungeons. Those are not dormitories. Because as you say, the corridors, the way where the beds were lined, and you see, because when we started asking, why do you put CCTVs in the bedrooms? Because that is totally unethical and unacceptable. He said, no, we actually place them in the corridor. The corridors are bedrooms.
It's a bedroom.
So when you look at that, it is negligence, so what we call the dereliction of duty by the people, the administrators. But those administrators report to the appointing authority. The CS, we said, was sleeping on the job. The PS was busy campaigning for gubernatorial position and completely out of touch with what was happening. What happened at Tumishi happened 2 years earlier at Ndarasha. 21
indeed.
little boys lost like that. Then you say, oh, let's give them 25,000 each to go and bury. And then you forget about it. Somehow, as you pointed out, these people do not feel it because their own are not in there. They are creating those conditions for your children and the children out there. They have created this demarcation. That there are those who are supposed to go for the better ones. And indeed, I think they're promoting more of privatization in education.
Indeed, yes.
So that according to them, for as long as there's quality there, those who have money can go there, let the rest be here. That is a problem. Our point at the time, and still remains true, is that we must account for the negligence, for the harm that we cause to those children. The focus has now shifted that we had some 9 bad girls. We are missing the point. Children will remain children and experiment with anything. I think as a Limubora, we even said children are the type that would joke around with snakes.
Precisely.
Why? They're children, they're experimenting. And even those who, not just the girls' school, even boys' schools, how many have been caught with leaves which are not tobacco or sorts, but they just want to experiment, It is always in their nature. And that's why we require those standards to be there, that there's a minder there. Why do you think we want those minders? Because we know they are not able to reason correctly at the right time. That's why you must intervene.
But Boaz, allow me to interrupt you because I want to challenge you. Do you not think we should just eliminate boarding schools? What are we doing here? This is the age when children need their parents the most. We now have insufficient developmental psychological evidence to show that this is when children need the guidance.
I'll not say no.
Yes.
But I'll also shock you. And I know you have the statistics. More than 70% of our children are in day school. Are you seeing that? So the threat is really not why the boarding school now. And I think for Eli Mubora, we created what we are calling the principles and standards for quality education that included how those schools should be set up anywhere and wherever they are, so that you are not rushing for the Kenya High. Because you have another Kenya High in Omboga. You have another one in Moyale. Because they're standard schools, teachers, equipment, all that. In that case, then you'll find the learning becoming accessible for everyone, and there's no discrimination. The inequality gap, which is widening more and more, and the struggle that you saw grade 10, and their parents struggling to access C1 schools. Why? Because they've passed through those other schools. They know what CBC requires are schools that are well-equipped, the infrastructure non-compromised. So they were running away from these other schools. So for as long as we have not addressed the quality of the schools that we establish in public schools, then I think entertaining the debate about day or boarding is still premature. It's still really not where we are focusing on. For us as a Limubora, we are asserting whether day or boarding, the safety standards are a must, non-negotiable. And indeed, it is in our interest to ensure that we actually also allow or create as many open schools for those learners to go and feel free to interact with their parents. But let me tell you, the economic turmoil we are also having out here.
Yeah.
The parents are forever traumatized.
Yeah.
They come home and they're struggling to understand where will we even have food for these young ones. Some of them would rather that, okay, the so-called bursaries enabling them to take a few to school, and then they become close and endear themselves to local politicians for those things. So they see that as a way out. We must look for a long-term solution.
Yeah.
A long-term solution is not in the quick fixes we are adopting, is in establishing decent schools, public schools, decent public schools which will give quality education, not where people are just going and coming back. Mamka, I'll tell you, the grade 10 students that landed in these schools, I've disclosed where one of my children is. Others are also in other schools. And I'm very close to the teachers. They tell you we had to take extra measures just to bring them to the level that now the curriculum for grade 10 can start. Because junior school, they didn't have teachers. They didn't have books, and all those books were being, they're talking of rationalization almost each and every term, changing here and now. The learning methodology that was there was a CRE teacher coming to help them learn mathematics and telling them, can you look for the examples which are there? Who can demonstrate how that example has been done? And that is learning. I visited some of those schools, not me alone, many of our members. And he said that they got a raw deal. This pioneer class and even the two behind them, I think we've used them as guinea pigs that probably we may need to see how to remedy the harm that they are having. Because the moment they land at the university 2029, we may start seeing a more sharper decline in the transition and even in the graduation to come. We must be smarter now and plan ahead.
So, I mean, I have so many more questions and I know we're running out of time. But let me ask this one.
Yes.
CBC is already losing. So before the implementation of CBC, the final classes that took 844, the performance fell from what we had, called the bell curve to this almost like, I don't even know what you'd call that curve, because the majority of Kenyans were failing. In the year I graduated from Kenya High, I think there were 24 of us who got straight A's. And then there were, a sizable number who got A minuses, B's, and so on. But then there was this absolute drop-off where getting an A in any school became, how is that even possible? So I will say something else about my own education. When I was in high school, I suffered my B's. I was lucky enough to get an A in KCSE. I went to University of Nairobi, medical school, B, C, C. Managed to make it without dropping off and really questioning my own intelligence. Then I went and got a PhD in Harvard and never got less than an A. How could I get never less than an A in Harvard? The most prestigious university there is in the world. And yet I was not considered the same brain, same person.
You're not considered at the top.
Exactly. So the question I'm asking is, how could all our... And Kenyans were very wildly happy about this idea that, oh my gosh, our students are cheating, so now they should all fail. And all these brilliant young learners are now at home, without degrees, without mbele wala nyuma. But how can it be possible that someone who was getting C's at the University of Nairobi was getting A's at Harvard, and now we have nothing but C's? In those final years of 844, how did we have such a drop-off? Did that make any sense? And what are the losses, and how are those losses going to be plugged in, even as we're talking about the losses that we're experiencing because of this transition to CBC?
When an education system is not well thought out, the philosophy is wanting, structure completely out of place, it now goes back to the child to give the best that they have to cruise through. That's exactly what happened to you. I would tell you, if I say Asia and South Pacific director of one of the international institutions, you might actually get to know the name. That's somebody who got a C in KCSE in Kenya in 1990. Went to USIU. got upgraded, went there as a worker, and then because the way, the mannerism and the way, this is a worker who loved going to the library, and one of the sponsors there just spotted this guy and said, "Do you want to do an upgrade? First class." Actually, the first year on getting to that class was top, full scholarship, masters in the US, and I'm telling you, that is that is one of
I think I know who.
you know the person that I'm talking about.
Oh, we revere.
But look at that. And I'll tell you that from where I come, because I've supported a number of the young ones who, when Kenyan education was so expensive and all, but across the border in Uganda, you could sponsor those going for Form 5 and 6. And from there, they were getting top courses at the Makerere and all that. And they graduated first class.
Yes.
But here
they
were not able to go through. In other words, our system has not been structured well to promote that development, the intellectual, the skills, in a way that one would feel confident. Our structure is one where Professor Magoa, sorry to use this example a number of times, comes and tells you there's no need of struggling to get an A.
Yeah.
When he himself, his child, is struggling to have an A.
Yes.
You see the kind of hypocrisy.
Yes.
So we must get the education system right, the philosophy right, the foundation and the pathway, this thing of calling them pathway. I mean, when you are inducting these young ones to imbibe knowledge, to develop skills based on, now they start seeing, where would I like to be, to direct my attention to. And you do not make it so early. You remember, they had insisted that by junior school, all is done. You'll go to STEM, you'll go to art and sport, you'll go to social sciences, and we told them that is not possible.
Crazy.
Right now, grade 10 are proving us right. Because those who joined STEM just simply say, no, that's not where I think I wanted to go. Why? Because junior school, they didn't interact with science in a significant manner. They were more or less trying to equip to equip them to the system that 844 replaced, the predecessor system, where O-level, which was up to Form 4, then from O-level, you've done all the general subjects, the sciences and arts. Then you say, for me, I think maybe the science path, maybe the arts path. But again, there are certain core and the general papers that guys would do there, So they would continue to help them grow. But in our case, you're telling that young one who has not interacted with any science teacher that they are going to do STEM, or because they just feel, I want to do other say the pathways. It is not fair. But I'm happy that at least they've opened that window, that they are changing. But the teachers are also complaining that the changes are massive. Mass exodus across. If only they had gone ahead and said now, Pangani, I almost called the Kenya again. People would accuse us of Pangani or St. Mary's, because I went through St. Mary's Yala, wachana na hiyo ingine.
Ya Uhuru Kenyatta.
Wachana na where they have the uji. But I'm saying St. Mary's Yala, where you go, some of those very nice upbringing, you get to the first Form 1, you are taken to those junior laboratories and workshops. You are interacting because you can mess up on almost anything. By the time you're in Form 2, then you start saying, okay, that's when now you are allowed to advance to the next laboratory. And then the study rooms for science students, for, all those kind of things. For science subjects, not for science students. And I'm saying so because I'm among those who are considered science students. And yet I was a lot more in the arts study rooms and those discussions, because you find that interesting.
That is precisely.
Yes, that is how the learning and education should be nurtured. And in Kenya, if we do not reset and get it right and see that we are on the wrong path, can we halt a little bit and reorient it? What Ambassador Amina, who was appointed the CS education, at some point after Matiang'i left,
Yeah.
Amina came. I don't know whether you're already back and you knew
No,
that.
I wasn't
But
back yet.
when Ambassador Amina said, I see lots of problems with this CBC, having been updated by the technocrats within the ministry and other stakeholders, we feel we require just 1 year to address the gaps we are seeing before we reorient it. She read that statement at KICD at 10 in the morning. By 2 o'clock, a statement had come from State House. At Jogo House, she was reading a totally different one. And 3 weeks later, she was out. That's when Magoha was brought in. In other words, intolerance.
Yeah.
And people who just push things.
Yeah.
Not because it is in the best interest of Kenya. It is not in Kenya's national interest, but it's because of what they are getting out of it. So that is a problem. For as long as our education is not homegrown, is not autochthonous, then we are in deep problems because the people that are ahead here, these young ones that we hope could be the future of this country. No wonder you're seeing many being used by almost everybody, called goons. I don't like using that because I see those as daughters and sons of mine who are only not being given the right dosage of knowledge that they require so that they can bring up their own families or develop themselves much better.
I think one of the most impressive things that happened this year was when the United States went to war with Iran. And we found out that every Iranian official held a quote-unquote STEMS degree in addition to a PhD in philosophy, and had written, an exhaustive Islamic reading of Kant, of Kantian philosophy. And that, that went to the heart of something that Professor Wandia talks about a lot, that this over-prioritization of STEM at the expense of the arts is a complete and utter misunderstanding, not just of the purpose of education, but of how the human mind works. Because when I was in medical school, one of the things I felt completely starved for was the arts. So when I had the opportunity to, when I went to a university where there's, you have your major, but you can perambulate around schools. I took philosophy classes. I took ethics classes. I took classes in political science. I was that is the best, that's the best education I've ever had, because I could, I knew where my heart was and where my focus was. But that was the foundation of actually my ability to even do things like post this podcast.
How many young ones get that opportunity or get that realization? Very few. Some of us, you get to be conscientized for having interacted with some people who are already conscious. The later Dr. Muga Kolale, for example, helped me a great deal. I was in science, doing the food science things. But I was always in his class, listening. That was philosophy that he was teaching, that he was there with the Criticus Forum now after the class for people just to discuss. And then you start realizing that this world is not just about going there to do the yogurt processing and whatever beer production that you're doing or sugar, that you required to understand a little bit more. But our education is not structured to help you have that broader knowledge. In fact, there are those who think that for you as a medic, your work is just in the hospitals and, deal with the sindano, dunga. But they don't understand that the interaction that you're having with other human beings require that you get more knowledgeable on even all the arts and the sociological sides of things. So I think for me, our education must be reset. We must rethink how do we want to set it up. Where do we start from? We do not have to go back and start from a scratch like nothing ever exists. I think where Professor Douglas Odhiambo left this thing, if we had the goodwill, political goodwill, and then we had the right people to steer it, we will be bringing up a little bit more. You have people in parliament struggling on how to divide bursaries. When you tell them, but bursaries for what? When it is supposed to be free and compulsory. Put all that money together and direct it to school. The right time, the right amount, without kickbacks or to any ghosts, because you people have got the ability to talk to ghosts. Direct it to the right place, and we'll be able to provide education for each and everyone in the urban areas. I know time is really against us, but look at what is happening. That in most of our informal settlements, we call them people's settlements, others call them slums and all that, but people are there because they don't have alternative. But there are no public schools. And so communities or some young entrepreneur of people who probably did not even go through any formal education somewhere. I know of a mechanic who had a garage, and because that garage could not bring in so much money, converted that into an up-bed school because, you can actually collect some fees, you know. So because of that, the nature of that kind of a thing, that you neglect where people are. You are not establishing the schools. You are not providing teachers there. You are not creating a conducive environment that is safe, both within the school and within the surrounding. Because, you know, if the surrounding is also not very safe, our girls are in trouble. But every child, because the drug peddlers are all over. So you must ensure that you protect these young ones, but provide those schools in those areas. In Nairobi here, when we did the last assessment, the wards like in the Mabatini were complete entire ward you can imagine, with no single public school. What do you say of that? We must invest in establishing quality public schools and ensure that all our children are in the school, not the 2.5 million that are out of school as we speak. And nobody seems to care. Even the budget you're seeing, you hope that the budget should be curing that. It is not even mentioned. It is not an issue to them.
Great. Thank you so much. So there's so many more questions I would like to ask, but I will wrap it up here and we will repeat this again because this question of education, I think, is fundamental to how we transform this country. We cannot transform this country without transforming education, rethinking the philosophical foundation of it, rethinking equality and how to create equality across the various parts of the country. You've mentioned the rural areas with no public schools, the informal settlements with no schools. We need to rethink CBC and streaming students. We need to rethink access to the way we differentiate between STEM and the arts. We need to be very serious about equipping our schools. We need to be serious about thinking about creating a future cohort of people who can actually, exploit the resources that we have as a nation to make us prosperous. We need to be thinking, and we have those foundations in the Constitution, and we are simply not living up to them. So
we must, sorry to cut you before you just conclude on that. For whatever it is worth, provide more resources to education. I do not want to hear people say, we're already giving a lot. It's still not adequate until we get to understand that what it costs to educate that learner, pre-primary, primary, secondary and university, and then we provide it because the statistics we have on the numbers at those levels, and then we know that infrastructure is also adequate. If we do that for the next 10 to 20 years, whoever will be coming after that will be seeing a citizenry that can seize the moment and actually push us ahead. We should not be comparing ourselves with the so-called Singapores.
Absolutely, I think not. Precisely. We should be our own standard.
No, we set the standard. We set the M-Pesa. Where was Singapore when we were doing M-Pesa? And other things,
Thank you so much, Boaz, for joining us in studio. And thank you so much to our viewers and our listeners. And as always, remember to watch us on YouTube, follow us on X at A Madness Pod, Instagram, A Madness Pod, TikTok, same. And I look forward to seeing you all very soon. Thank you.
Thank you.